the early bird, November 1st, inside D.C. Number one, bill to expand sanctions against Iran oil. A bipartisan Stop Harboring Iranian Petroleum Act, known as SHIP, was introduced by Representative Mike Lawler of New York, Republican, targeting entities of the Iranian oil industry for sanctions. That's headed to the House floor for a vote this week. Republican and Democratic lawmakers who criticized the Biden administration's easing of Iranian sanctions in September said Iran's oil exports have risen because of a surge purchases by China. Why does that matter? It's unclear at this point that additional sanctions on Iran are going to be effective, as China will continue to buy cheap, illicit oil from Iran. Sanctions have failed to cripple the Russian economy after they invaded Ukraine. With the perceived waning of American hard power, American soft power may be losing effectiveness. Number two, Hamas terrorist attacks on U.S. soil is possible. FBI Director Chris Wray said terrorist attacks inspired by the Israeli Hamas conflict, otherwise known as a war, are likely to increase during testimony at the Senate Homeland Security Governmental Affairs Committee hearing on threats to the homeland. Wray added the FBI can't discount the possibility that Hamas or another group could conduct attacks on U.S. soil, and that there are specific threats of Iran-linked cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. Why does this matter? As we talked about in previous episodes, Hamas and Hezbollah have a presence in the U.S. already. Critical infrastructure, civilian and military facilities, and Jewish religious institutions remain key targets for foreign adversaries. Number three, Biden to host Latin American leaders at summit. President Joe Biden will host leaders from Latin America and Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau at the America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity Summit on Friday, 3 November, where Biden will pitch the U.S. as an alternative partner for the region to China. This summit is expected to focus on building more resilient supply chains for critical minerals and semiconductors. Why it matters is because Biden's intent to present the U.S. as a strategic alternative to China is likely to be hindered by China's less judgmental stance regarding foreign aid. The history of U.S. intervention in the region could also present an obstacle for Latin American countries with governments that have opposed American interests and American intervention in the past. That summarizes inside D.C. Let's go to the domestic front. Number four, renewable failures spur green energy rebrand. Solar and wind power projects have not delivered as initially promised, prompting several states to rebrand nuclear, natural gas, and biomass as renewable energy resources. Why does this matter? Higher interest rates and reality have run headfirst into energy ideology. Most state lawmakers could expand the green energy definition as solar and wind power continue to disappoint, but utility companies must still comply with renewable portfolio demands. Number five, infrastructure spending props up the U.S. economy. Money from the $1.2 trillion Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed in 2021 made its way through the economy, boosting state and local infrastructure spending in the third quarter. But U.S. construction equipment demand may have already peaked as Caterpillar dealers' inventory rose for the third consecutive quarter while the company's backlog shrunk. Why does this matter? State and local government infrastructure spending should remain above average next year and help construction equipment manufacturers, including Caterpillar, the world's largest and the industry bellwether. Also, government spending, one component of aggregate economic output, could boost the GDP, the gross domestic product, and mask a recession, although the average American may be experiencing one already. Number six, Biden, Alaska plan threat to future drilling. Oil industry advocates said proposed changes to the National Petroleum Reserve, Alaska, by the Biden administration would thwart development efforts in a crude oil-rich region the size of Indiana. ConocoPhillips Alaska President Eric Isaacson said the new rule presumes permits shouldn't be used for energy production except in circumstances that are undefined. Why does it matter? Because this new rule change to the National Petroleum Reserve-Alaska would deal a major blow to future oil supply, which is in line with the Biden administration's energy strategy to force the adoption of green energy alternatives. And finally, under domestic and number seven, Trump wades into Michigan ballot legal battle. Former President Donald Trump filed a lawsuit against the Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson to block efforts to remove him from the 2024 ballot in Michigan. Trump's lawyers argued that Benson's lack of certainty on efforts to block Trump from Michigan 2024 ballot affects how the Trump campaign directs resources. Why does it matter? Because Trump is going on the offensive in Michigan after a Michigan judge ruled he did not have standing to join the lawsuit like he did in Colorado and Minnesota. Like Colorado case and Minnesota, those are set to begin this week, and expect any decision against Trump to make its way to the Supreme Court, likely in the form of an emergency petition to settle the legal question of the 14th Amendment, disqualifying Trump from the ballot before the 2024 general election begins. And finally, let's look at geostrategic. Number 8, IMF. Central banks may keep rates higher for longer. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, released its semi-annual Global Financial Stability Report, stressing that central banks around the world may need to keep interest rates high to battle inflation, but higher rates will add pressure to economies. Acute stress in the global banking system has subsided, the IMF author wrote, but an abrupt tightening of financial conditions could retest the global financial system. Why does it matter? Even with higher interest rates, inflation will remain elevated in many countries for two reasons. First, this inflationary cycle is supply-driven from shortages, not excess consumer demand. Central banks only have control over consumer demand and cannot increase the supply of commodities or repair broken supply chains. Second, governments are the biggest borrowers with no regard for interest rates and no intention of repaying the debt. With war expanding, governments will borrow and spend more, increasing the inflation rate. Number 9, U.S. and Western governments planning post-Hamas Gaza. According to Secretary of State U.S. Antony Blinken, the United States and other countries are considering a variety of possible permutations for the Gaza Strip after Hamas is removed from control. Blinken reportedly told a Senate Appropriations Committee hearing that the status quo in Gaza could not continue and Israel was not interested in running it. One of the possible options includes a multinational caretaker authority under UN oversight. Why does it matter? It's clear Western nations have little confidence that Palestinians can govern Gaza following whatever ending Israel imposes on Hamas. In this case, borrowing a forced exodus of the Palestinian people, a governing body must be put in place to restore order and basic services. Some type of UN caretaker authority is the likely solution, although it may not be acceptable to Israel if staffed by militant pro-Hamas supporters. Blinken emphasized the U.S. military participation in peacekeeping mission was not an option. The likelihood that this conflict will resolve in the short term is practically nil. 10. Yemen declares war on Israel. Yemen's Houthi government declared war on Israel Tuesday. A Houthi spokesperson said in a televised statement that its military had fired a number of ballistic missiles at Israel and that there would be more to come. Jordan reported on Tuesday it intercepted a land attack cruise missile fired by Houthi forces at Israel. Why does it matter? Because the Houthi declaration of war could be the first in several pro-Palestinian countries to join the fight against Israel in support of Hamas. While the Houthis have a limited capability to project force onto Israeli territory, they do have a supply of Iranian missiles and attack drones, a potential complication given recent statements by Israeli officials that they're running low on Iron Dome missile defense munitions. That concludes the early bird for November 1, 2023.